Hey, it's Matt O'Leary, and I thought I'd try something different with my top 10 psychedelic pop albums of the 2010s, an era of that style of music that I feel is just often ignored, but really, really good. And there have just been endless books about this summer of love period, 1967 to 69, about, Woodstock and psychedelic rock and folk and soul. It's all so well documented that it's tough to have anything unique to say. But it's undeniable that this time in music history planted a pretty special sonic seed that's grown and led to a couple notable Renaissance periods in my mind. Different elements of psychedelic music has shown up and been co-opted by all these different eras of rock since the late 60s. Prog rock and heavy metal and electronic music and even new wave and punk have seen their psychedelic bands. But most notably for me, as someone who was in their late teens and 20s during this time, was the 2010s, a time that I think is one of the more underappreciated eras in psychedelic music history. So what do I mean by psychedelic? To be clear, I don't really mean the roots of the genre as far as the anti-war movement or even just the mind-expanding nature. The bands and albums I'm about to talk about don't really have much in common with these aspects of psychedelic music. The psychological and the metaphysical and the pharmacological. Well, I guess, drugs might still be part of it, but I'm simply just talking about the aesthetic building blocks of psychedelia, the pure sound of the Beatles' Revolver, or the Zombies' Odyssey and Oracle, or the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and everything else that came in their wake, and yeah, it has to have some hooks to qualify as psych pop. So with that set up, let's get to number 10 on the list. And I only have one rule here, which is one album per artist, just to make things, a little more spread, a little more diverse. Oh, yeah, we gotta do some honorable mentions too. So let me just list off a bunch of albums that didn't quite make the list, but are still really good and worth your time. So Morgan Delt's self-titled album, Derridorian's The Expanding Flower Planet. That's Angel Derridorian of the Dirty Projectors. Congratulations by MGMT. And I also had Little Dark Age in there because I feel like that's just a personal favorite, and it's a little more synth pop than it is psychedelic pop in my mind. Pom Pom by Ariel Pink, and What For by Toro y Moi. Painted Ruins by Grizzly Bear. Into by Vinyl Williams from 2015. Skip Tracing by Mild High Club. The Great Pretenders by Mini Mansions. That's an awesome album. And then Melody's Echo Chamber's self-titled album, the first one, and then Bon Voyage I'd put in this as well. First up is kind of an underdog pick, but they had to make it in the top 10. And sadly, this is an artist who's sort of faded away, and that's a theme I've noticed as I've been doing this with a lot of these artists, is just they haven't quite figured out what to do with themselves in the 2020s. And, figuring out how to evolve with rock music is just a little bit unclear. Yeah, it's the second album by Jocko Gardner called Hypnophobia, and it came out in 2015, and you'll notice that's a pretty well-represented year in my top 10. This is very late 60s, kind of Zombies and the Left Bank kind of stuff, with an equal balance of synthy stuff and these acoustic folky sounds. The song Before the Dawn has this Pink Floyd On the Run synth sequencing kind of thing that just floats off into this 8-minute trance. While Brightly is just so British, it's so acoustic, and it has that filigree kind of stately, sing-songy sound. I mentioned On the Run, and I think there are those kind of Waters era Pink Floyd moments on here, but songs like Face to Face and Brightly are definitely the Syd Barrett era. Just really great, really solid songs on this album, front to back. Again, it's Jocko Gardner's Hypnophobia. At number 9 is a band from my later years of high school, a band from Brooklyn that I think really encapsulates this East Coast sort of thing going on at that time. But this band had a uniquely global sound, with sounds coming in from all different cultures and traditions, and really evidenced in that first album, which is a complete masterpiece, All Our Symbols. In retrospect, it's just a groundbreaking experimental pop album. No one was doing something at the time quite like that. But it's the second album from 2010 that snuck into that decade and ends up making my list at number 9. Yeah, 2010 brought the second album from Yeasayer, Odd Blood. This album stripped back all the layering of that first album for more immediate pop hooks and just more low end. This is definitely the most danceable album on my list, and it's got more electronic elements and definitely a less shy, less bashful sound as Jocko Gardner. Songs like Rome and One, those are just electronic dance music for hipsters, basically, when hipsters was still a word that people used. But you just can't deny the musicianship, the infectiousness of this album. Ambling Alp and I Remember bring a similar stadium-filling sound with all these quirky little funny synth sounds, and it's just a true amalgam of experimental pop and psychedelic sounds. Super quirky, super ostentatious, just very bold and brash, and despite all the world music, it's very American in that way, just big, brash, in your face, and definitely worthy of a top 10. Number 8 is Back to the Party, back to the nonstop fun of Yeasayer. And it's a band from probably one of the most, if not the most important city in this whole neo-psych movement. It's gotta be Pond, the first band on this list from Perth. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. A real hotbed city for DIY psych rock for quite some time. I'm not really crazy about everything this band has put out, but this album right here, man, it feels like space again. It's just undeniable. I mean, I've had so much fun with this over the years, and every year since it came out in 2015, it just grows and grows on me. This album's just tons of fun from start to finish with these upbeat bops like Zond and Outside is the Right Side and Waiting Around for Grace and Elvis's Flaming Star. This is a characteristically trippy pop record with all these bizarre little sounds and over-processed everything. I'm not a huge fan of Nick Albrook's voice in general, but I think these are some of his best melodies and best performances of his career, and the way they process his voice, the way they layer it up, it just really works. There are also a couple of really slow, epic ballads on this album, like Sitting Up on Our Crane or Holding Out for You. So the album swings nicely between snappy numbers and these slow, heavy hitters. All of it held together by a whirlpool of synth waves and fuzz guitar. And like I said, just a fun album. It's nothing super deep, nothing super profound, but just a good time. Okay, so number 7 is pretty similar to number 6 in that it's not an overly intellectual album or, a real thinker or even something totally new and revolutionary for the genre. But I think this album right here, Temple's Sun Structures, is just rock solid. Yeah, I don't care how derivative it is, they just went out and they made the album that every fan of this genre, every fan of those late 60s classics wanted to hear. It has that strange quality where the first 7 or 8 songs on the album sound like they could have been lead singles, it's like they're just so instantaneous and the melodies just make sense and they go exactly where you want them to go. I particularly love the swaggering synth melody on The Golden Throne and just all those little melodic synth interludes that complement the vocals perfectly. The song Move With the Season has this cool thing where the bridge comes in and it introduces this new melody and it kind of takes you up a mountain like it's going up, 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 and then it reaches its peak and you're coming back down and everything's good. And then just everything cuts out and it's just his guitar and his voice and he reaches for this falsetto note and it's like you reached a point that you didn't know was there before, like you're going down the mountain. All of a sudden there's this cliff and you just leap off into the clouds. I remember listening to that like for the first time and just thinking like, again with this album, it's like, That's where the melody should go. Like that is the ideal destination, and then it did it. I think this band never really reached the heights of this album, which is a little sad. You know, it's a little bit of a first album, best album kind of scenario. But if you're up for something more immediate, a little more instantaneous and accessible, then it's got to be this one. Okay, number 6 is going to be the last one I cover today in this video, this part 1 of my top 10 psychedelic pop albums of the 2010s. And number 6 is definitely a more introverted, a much more cerebral experience than Pond or Yeasayer or really any of those albums, Temples. It's a much more subtle album and much more, I'd say, intellectual as well, and, you know, just a deeply moving album, even for its pop appeal. Chris Cohen was a member of the experimental rock band Deerhoof, who I absolutely love, and he also played with Cass McCombs and Ariel Pink. Finally releasing a solo album at the age of, I think, 36 or 37 in 2012. It's this album, Overgrown Path by Chris Cohen. Entities separated and divide in endless tubes. I think this album sounds like someone who's a little reluctant to be in the spotlight in the first place. You know, it's someone who enjoys the feeling from a well-written song more so than the notoriety that might bring. There's no like psych freak out guitar solos or bizarre bursts of sounds like there are on that Pond album. This is much smoother jazz tinged psych with a real emphasis on arrangements. Every sound, every synth tone, every clean guitar sound, every flanger guitar sound, every phaser guitar sound, every bass tone or drum tone is very chosen very specifically. I feel like, you know, nothing feels wasted or thrown together. Yet it can all sound very hazy and lazy and woozy, you know, with Cohen's voice having a very unique, laid back and almost flat tone. But he just has like perfect intonation, you know, as a singer, he's just laser dead right in the middle of the pitch, and I don't think it's auto-tune. Ah, man, one of my favorite moments is that second track, Solitude, which is almost formless, with these ambient synth drones that almost have no meter or real tempo, you know, it's just a snail pace. But the tension in the chords and these swells of guitar noise and just this incredibly minimal but potent melody. It all gives such weight to the lyrics, which, you know, are about these blue, very lonely moments in life. It's just 2.5 minutes of pure emotion, and it gets me every time. Every song is a highlight, really. You know, I think Cohen is so musically sophisticated and just knows how to make a melody work. And there's, like I said, not a wasted moment on the album. I think it's one of the more underrated albums in my whole record collection. And that's it for part 1 of this top 10. Let me know what you thought of these albums. If there are more that I missed, I'm sure there are some albums coming up that you would have on your list. So stay tuned. Again, scroll below to see that video. And as always, thank you so much for watching.